Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Invitation. It was a bleak November morning in London when Hercule Poirot, that most meticulous of detectives, sat at his breakfast table, considering the perfect symmetry of his toast rack. Across the room, a small fire burned brightly, banishing the gloom that pressed against the windows. Captain Hastings, his loyal friend and chronicler, was already halfway through his bacon and eggs. "Dash it, Poirot," he remarked cheerfully, "you do take your breakfast like a surgeon performing an operation." Poirot smiled indulgently. "Order, mon ami, is the foundation of all good things, even breakfast. One must begin the day as one means to continue, with precision, harmony, and method." As he spoke, the morning post arrived. Poirot sorted through the envelopes with his usual fastidious care: bills, an invitation to lecture, a note from Scotland Yard, until he paused upon one particular letter. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, unmistakably feminine. The envelope bore an embossed seal of two crossed hawks above a motto, Virtus et Fides. He broke the seal carefully, his brows lifting as he read. "My dear Monsieur Poirot, though we have not met, your reputation for solving the unsolvable precedes you. Forgive my boldness in writing, but strange and most unsettling occurrences have disturbed the peace of my family home, Waverly Chase. I can offer no explanation, only the sense that something dreadful is approaching. I should be greatly comforted by your presence for the coming weekend. My brother will, of course, extend every hospitality. Yours sincerely, Lady Imogen Waverly." Poirot read the letter twice before laying it neatly beside his plate. "A most curious communication," he said softly. "You observe, Hastings, how she appeals not merely to my professional vanity, but to my sympathies. Something dreadful is approaching. An instinct, perhaps, and the instincts of a lady are not to be dismissed." Hastings grinned. "Sounds to me like a tiresome country house gathering. Still, if there's something odd afoot, I suppose we might make an adventure of it." Poirot's grey-green eyes gleamed. "Adventure, yes, but tempered with observation, order, and the exercise of the little grey cells." 3 days later, the two men were seated in a motorcar bound for Surrey. The sky was the colour of tarnished silver, and a steady drizzle veiled the fields. As the car wound its way through narrow lanes bordered by skeletal trees, Hastings glanced about with interest. "Rather lonely country," he remarked. "Perfect place for ghost stories." "Or for secrets, perhaps," Poirot replied, adjusting his gloves. "You English conceal so much behind your hedges, your passions, your ambitions, even your crimes." They arrived at Waverly Chase as the last of the daylight faded. The great house loomed from the mist, its stone walls streaked with age, its many windows glinting like half-shuttered eyes. The gravel drive curved through an avenue of oaks before ending beneath a portico where a butler, tall and solemn, awaited them. "Welcome to Waverly Chase, gentlemen," he intoned. "Her ladyship awaits you in the drawing-room." Inside, warmth and refinement replaced the dreariness of the grounds. Firelight flickered on polished furniture and ancestral portraits. Poirot noted at once the faint scent of lavender, and beneath it, something metallic, almost medicinal. Lady Imogen Waverly rose as they entered. She was a woman of about 30, tall and graceful, her fair hair drawn back simply. Yet her eyes, a clear grey, held a shadow that belied her composed manner. "Monsieur Poirot, I am so grateful you came," she said, extending her hand. "I hardly dared hope you would." Poirot bowed slightly. "Mademoiselle, I could not refuse a lady in distress. You wrote of unsettling occurrences, perhaps you will enlighten me." She hesitated. Strange noises at night. Locked doors found open. A mirror smashed with no one near it. And once, she glanced nervously towards the hallway, a figure seen in the garden, though all were inside. "Ah," murmured Poirot. "A presence unseen yet felt. Continue, if you please." Before she could speak, a man entered, tall, broad-shouldered, with a military bearing and a weathered face. "Archibald Waverly," he said brusquely, shaking Poirot's hand. "My sister has dragged you into what I suspect is nothing more than servants' gossip. Still, if you can put her mind at ease, I shall be obliged." Poirot inclined his head. "It is always wise, Colonel, to investigate what one's instincts whisper. They are often the truest guides." As they spoke, more guests were introduced. Dr. Leonard Fell, the local physician, mild and soft-spoken, his spectacles perpetually misted. Miss Daphne Gray, a young artist whose large dark eye seemed to absorb every shadow. Mr. Victor Nash, a charming businessman with a careless smile and the air of a man who believes himself invincible. And Mrs. Clara Nash, pale and silent beside him, her beauty dimmed by a curious melancholy. Dinner that evening was a civilized affair, though tension hummed beneath the surface like a hidden wire. Poirot observed it all with quiet satisfaction, as though each gesture and glance were a clue in itself. Colonel Waverly spoke at length about the declining fortunes of the estate and the recently reopened Waverly mine, a silver pit long abandoned since an accident 20 years earlier. When Nash expressed interest in investing, the Colonel's jaw tightened. "I'll not see our land turned into a commercial venture," he said coldly. Nash laughed, swirling his wine. "My dear Colonel, sentimentality is costly. There's profit to be made, and that's the only virtue that matters these days." Lady Imogen flinched, Mrs. Nash's hand tightened on her napkin. Poirot noted both reactions with the faintest arch of an eyebrow. As the meal continued, the conversation grew brittle. Miss Gray spoke shyly of her art, landscapes mostly, though lately I've painted the mine, it fascinates me. Dr. Fell warned her against spending too much time near it. "The air down there," he said quietly, "has a way of unsettling the nerves." When the ladies withdrew, Hastings leaned closer to Poirot. "Rather a gloomy lot, aren't they? Except Nash, though he's the sort of fellow one instinctively distrusts." Poirot's gaze lingered on the door through which the women had vanished. "Yes, Hastings. Mr. Nash smiles too easily. A man who conceals anger behind charm is more dangerous than one who displays it openly." Later, as the guests dispersed for the night, Poirot stood before the fire, deep in thought. The storm outside had gathered strength, wind moaned through the chimneys, and rain lashed the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck midnight. Lady Imogen's words echoed in his mind, "Something dreadful is approaching." He turned to Hastings, who was stifling a yawn. "Mon ami," he said softly, "observe this house well. Its walls are thick with secrets. And secrets, like damp, have a way of seeping through the finest stone." As they climbed the staircase to their rooms, Poirot paused, glancing down the dim corridor lined with portraits of long-dead Waverleys. For a moment, he thought he saw a movement, a shadow slipping soundlessly through the half-light. When he turned his little electric torch upon it, the space was empty. "Strange," murmured Poirot. "Already, the house begins to speak." Outside, thunder rolled like a distant drum. Waverly Chase slept uneasily, and somewhere within its ancient walls, the first whisper of murder stirred. Chapter 2: A Cry in the Night. The storm came in earnest that night. Wind howled through the trees, bending their ancient limbs until they seemed to claw at the very walls of Waverly Chase. Rain lashed against the tall windows, a ceaseless tapping that sounded almost like impatient fingers. Poirot, ever methodical, had spent the evening arranging his belongings with geometrical precision, brushes aligned, shoes polished and placed at an exact angle to the hearth. Hastings, meanwhile, had been less occupied with symmetry and more with a novel borrowed from Lady Imogen's library. At 1:45, the lights flickered. Poirot looked up from his small notebook. "A most disagreeable storm," he murmured. "I do not like electricity that wavers. It reminds one of the human soul, unstable, flickering, and apt to go out when most inconvenient." Hastings laughed. "You and your philosophy, Poirot. I dare say the wiring in this old place is to blame." Poirot merely shrugged and drew the curtains shut with fastidious care. "Old houses, my friend, are like old families. They retain memories, and sometimes regrets." The clock on the mantel struck 12. The sound seemed unusually loud, echoing through the corridors beyond their door. Hastings yawned, stretched, and declared he would retire. Poirot, ever a creature of habit, sat a moment longer, sipping hot chocolate and studying the fire. Then, from somewhere deep within the house, came a sound, faint at first, then unmistakable. A scream. It tore through the storm, raw and desperate, rising to a pitch that froze the blood. Hastings dropped his candle. "Good Lord! What was that?" Poirot was already on his feet. "Come, Hastings! Quickly, to the corridor!" They hurried out, their slippers silent on the carpet. Doors were opening all along the hallway, pale faces peering out in alarm. Lady Imogen appeared, wrapped in a dressing gown, her eyes wide with terror. "It came from the library," she gasped. "Downstairs, I heard it from my room." Poirot took charge at once. "Hastings, fetch a lamp. Lady Imogen, remain here. Lock your door if you please. There is no need for more danger tonight." Together, Poirot and Hastings descended the great staircase. The air grew colder as they neared the ground floor. The storm's fury battered the windows, and a draught swept through the hall, carrying with it a strange metallic scent. The library door stood ajar. Light flickered within. Poirot pushed it open gently, and stopped. Victor Nash lay sprawled upon the Persian carpet before the hearth. The heavy bronze clock from the mantelpiece lay beside him, its face cracked, its hands frozen at midnight. A dark stain spread beneath his head. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the fire's low crackle and the rain's soft hiss against the panes. Poirot knelt beside the body, his movements precise, almost reverent. "He is quite dead," he said quietly. A single blow, delivered with great force. Hastings, pale, swallowed hard. Who could have done it? Everyone was in their rooms. Were they? Murmured Poirot. "We shall see." The door burst open. Colonel Waverly entered, fully dressed, his expression grim. Behind him came Dr. Fell, his spectacles gleaming in the lamplight. "My God," the colonel muttered. "Nash! Murdered!" Dr. Fell bent over the body, professional composure masking a flicker of shock. "Instantaneous death, I should say. The blow crushed the skull. Time of death, no later than midnight." Poirot nodded slowly. "Ah, yes. The clock confirms it. But whether it marks the moment of death or merely pretends to do so, that is another matter." He stood, surveying the room with a detective's cold curiosity. "Observe, Hastings, the open window." Rain spattered the carpet near the sill. The curtains flapped inward, driven by the gale. Beneath them, in the mud outside, the faint impression of footprints could be seen by the lamplight. "Footprints!" Hastings exclaimed. "So the killer escaped that way?" Poirot bent closer. "Indeed, but see, they are not of shoes. These are bare feet." The discovery sent a chill through the room. Colonel Waverly scowled. "A madman, then? Or some tramp from the village?" Poirot's gaze flicked to him. A possibility. Yet, my dear Colonel, tramps rarely choose to enter a locked house in a thunderstorm only to commit so purposeful a murder. By now, the others had gathered, Lady Imogen, white and trembling, Miss Daphne Gray, eyes wide with horror, and Mrs. Clara Nash, her face drained of all colour. When she saw her husband's body, Clara gave a strangled cry and would have fallen had Poirot not steadied her arm. "Madam, I beg you, sit." She sank into a chair, her eyes fixed upon the lifeless form before her. He was working late," she whispered. "I told him to come to bed." He laughed and said he had business letters to finish. Poirot's voice was gentle. "And what business was that, madam?" She hesitated. "Something about the mine. He was to meet the Colonel tomorrow to discuss investment." Colonel Waverly's mouth hardened. "Investment?" "Extortion, more like." The man was a parasite, clever but unscrupulous. Poirot looked sharply at him. "You disliked him, Colonel." "I despised him," Waverly said flatly. "But murder? Good God, Poirot, you don't think?" Poirot raised a hand. "I think nothing, yet. I only observe." He began a slow circuit of the room, eyes darting to the smallest detail, a chair slightly out of place, the faint scorch on the edge of the hearth rug, the open ledger upon the desk. With his immaculate precision, he noted everything, the overturned glass of brandy, the torn envelope on the floor, the faint smear of ash near Nash's hand. From time to time, he murmured softly to himself in French. Hastings, watching, marveled as always at the extraordinary focus that came over his friend in moments such as these. "Poirot," he whispered, "the window, could it have been forced from outside?" Poirot examined the latch. "None. It was opened from within." "You see the dust disturbed upon the sill?" "Someone leaned out, or wished us to think so." He turned suddenly to Dr. Fell. "Doctor, did you hear anything earlier this evening?" The physician shook his head. "Nothing until the scream. My room is on the far side of the house." Poirot's gaze moved from face to face, Lady Imogen pale but composed, Miss Gray trembling, Mrs. Nash silent and still, like a statue of grief. Finally he said quietly, "It will be best that no one leaves this house until the police arrive." "Colonel, you will see to that." Waverly nodded grimly. Poirot bent once more over the dead man. "A curious thing," he murmured. "The clock's hand points to 11:10, yet it stopped at midnight. Someone has interfered with time, mon ami." He straightened, eyes gleaming. "Murder is not merely an act of violence, it is an act of arrangement. And already, I see that our murderer arranges things with too much care." As they left the room, Lady Imogen caught his sleeve. "Monsieur Poirot, what does it mean? The bare footprints, the broken clock, the storm, it all feels so unnatural." Poirot looked at her kindly. "It means, Lady Imogen, that the murderer wished us to see madness, chaos. But chaos, you see, can be the most deliberate mask of all." The thunder rolled again, shaking the windows. Somewhere in the vast, echoing house, a door slammed in the wind. Poirot turned his gaze toward the darkness of the corridor. "The house has spoken its first word," he said softly. "Now, Hastings, we must listen for its second." Chapter 3, The Web of Secrets. Morning broke over Waverly Chase with a bleak, colorless light. The storm had passed, but its fury had left behind a stillness that felt somehow unnatural, a silence that seemed to listen. Poirot was already awake, immaculate as ever, his moustache trimmed to mathematical perfection. Hastings, rubbing sleep from his eyes, found him at the window, gazing thoughtfully across the rain-soaked lawns. "Well, Poirot," Hastings began, "I scarcely slept a wink. That cry, good heavens, it keeps echoing in my head. Had the police been?" Poirot nodded. They have come, they have looked, they have gone. They are excellent men, but alas, they observe only what shouts at them. We, mon ami, must listen to what whispers. He turned away from the window. Come, Hastings. The day begins, and with it, our little hunt. The drawing room had been turned into a sort of temporary headquarters. The servants moved quietly, whispering among themselves. Lady Imogen had taken charge of breakfast, though her hands trembled as she poured the coffee. Poirot declined food. When the mind is active, the stomach must be passive, he said with a faint smile. I will begin with the family, if you please. Lady Imogen inclined her head. I will ask them to come to you, Monsieur Poirot. Anything to end this dreadful uncertainty. She left, her footsteps light but hurried. Hastings watched her go with a frown. She seems frightfully nervous, don't you think? Poirot gave a small shrug. A lady may tremble for many reasons, Hastings, guilt is but one of them. The Colonel's account. Colonel Waverly was the first to appear. He entered briskly, as though facing a military inspection, though the dark circles under his eyes betrayed a sleepless night. I trust, Monsieur Poirot, you'll get to the bottom of this business quickly, he said gruffly. The whole affair is a damned scandal. Poirot inclined his head. Naturally, Colonel. Tell me, if you please, what you knew of Mr. Nash. The Colonel's jaw set. He was a scoundrel. A blackmailer, if you want the truth. He had a finger in every shady business in London, and he'd begun meddling here. I caught him sniffing about the mine, trying to persuade Imogen to sell her share. Said he had investors lined up. Lies, of course. He wanted control, and he'd stop at nothing to get it. Poirot's gaze sharpened. You disliked him, yet you invited him to your home. Waverly hesitated. Lady Imogen insisted. She thought he could help us raise funds to restore the estate. I warned her it was folly. Poirot leaned forward slightly. You had words with him last evening. A pause. We exchanged opinions. Heatedly. Poirot's moustache twitched. And after this discussion, you retired. At 10:30. I was in bed when I heard the scream. Poirot smiled faintly. Merci, Colonel. That will do. As Waverly left, Hastings muttered, he's hiding something. Possibly, said Poirot. But remember, Hastings, pride can resemble guilt to the untrained eye. Dr. Fell's quiet demeanor. Next came Dr. Leonard Fell, the village physician. He entered quietly, his thin hands folded before him. A dreadful night, Monsieur Poirot, he murmured. Mrs. Nash is near collapse. I gave her a sedative. Poirot nodded gravely. You knew Mr. Nash well. Not well, but long enough to dislike him, said the doctor. He was clever, too clever. He had a way of prying into one's affairs. He once hinted that he knew something unwise from my student days. An indiscretion I'd rather forget. Blackmail. Poirot suggested softly. Dr. Fell's face paled. Perhaps. He was fond of suggestion, he need not say much to make a man uneasy. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And you saw him last night? Yes. Briefly, in the hall at 10. He said he meant to write letters before bed. Letters, Poirot repeated. Did you notice if any were posted? Dr. Fell hesitated. No, and now that you mention it, I do not believe so. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, doctor. That is all. Miss Daphne Gray's tears. The next visitor was Miss Daphne Gray, the young artist. She looked fragile as she entered, her dark eyes swollen from weeping. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot," she began tremulously, "I wish I'd never come here. It's all been dreadful from the start." Poirot gestured kindly for her to sit. "Mademoiselle, calm yourself. Tell me what you know." She twisted a handkerchief in her fingers. "Mr. Nash, he was interested in my work, also, he said. He offered to buy several of my paintings, but at absurdly low prices. Then he began to hint that he might help me to succeed if I were agreeable to his attentions." Poirot's brows lifted. "Ah. The serpent with charm." Miss Grey's lip trembled. "Last night, he asked me to meet him in the library at 11. I went, foolishly, hoping to reason with him. He grew angry. I fled, I swear, he was alive when I left." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And how did you leave, mademoiselle?" "Through the window, it was open. I was afraid of being seen." "Did you, by any chance, lose something in your flight?" Her eyes widened. "My earring." "You found it?" Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed." "Near the window. You confirm, then, that you were there at 11? "Yes. But I swear I did not harm him." "I believe you," Poirot said gently. "Fear and guilt are not the same thing." As she left, Hastings whispered, "So she was there, alone with him. That's suspicious enough." Poirot's gaze followed her retreating figure. "No, Hastings. If she were the killer, she would not weep with such abandon. Her tears are genuine, though perhaps not for Nash." Mrs. Nash silence. Mrs. Clara Nash came last. She was pale but composed, her face that of a woman who had suffered long before the night's tragedy. "Madam," Poirot said softly, "you have my sympathy. Grief may cloud the mind, but truth clears it. Will you tell me what passed between you and your husband last night?" Her voice was low, almost toneless. "We argued. He had been drinking. He said cruel things, as he often did. I left him in the library at 10 and went to bed. I heard nothing more until the scream." "Did you love him, madam?" Poirot asked quietly. Something flickered in her eyes, pain, perhaps, or resentment. "Once. Long ago. But love can die long before a body does." Poirot inclined his head. "And you knew of his dealings, his blackmail, his business schemes?" She met his gaze steadily. "I knew more than most. But I never imagined anyone would hate him enough to kill him." Poirot's tone was gentle, but his eyes were keen. "No, madam. You merely wished him gone, as, perhaps, did everyone under this roof." She made no answer. When she rose to leave, Poirot watched her carefully. Her composure was too perfect, her grief too controlled. Poirot reflects. When the interviews were over, Poirot sat in silence for some minutes, fingers steepled, eyes half closed. Hastings shifted impatiently. "Well, Poirot, everyone seems to have had some reason to want Nash out of the way." Poirot nodded slowly. "Oh, Hastings. We have the blackmail doctor, the insulted artist, the resentful wife, and the angry brother. A fine quartet, each playing their note of hatred. But hatred alone does not make a murderer." He rose, adjusting his tie. "We must now return to the scene of the crime. There are still things that whisper there, and I must listen." In the library, the morning light fell coldly across the Persian rug where Nash had died. Poirot's eyes roamed over every inch, lingering on the broken clock. "The hand points to 11:10, he murmured. "Yet the police insist death came at midnight. Someone wished to deceive time, to bend it to their alibi. That, Hastings, is artistry of a most dangerous kind." He turned toward the open window, where the rain had washed the footprints into faint, shapeless smudges. Bare feet, a broken clock, and the suggestion of madness, he mused. Whoever killed Mr. Nash is clever, perhaps too clever. Poirot smiled faintly, a glint in his eye. And when a murderer tries too hard to mislead Hercule Poirot, it is always their undoing. Chapter 4: Shadows in the Rain. The rain had not ceased, it merely changed its tone, no longer a furious drumming but a steady, persistent whisper, like the murmuring of something unresolved. Waverly Chase lay wrapped in grey mist, the lawn slick with water, the air thick with dread. Poirot stood by the library window that morning, gazing out across the sodden gardens. "Mon cher Hastings," he said quietly, "crime is like the storm. It passes, yes, but it leaves behind mud, debris, and the marks of chaos. If one is careful, one may read the mud as one reads a book." Hastings, still somewhat pale from the night's events, gave a weary sigh. "You and your mud, Poirot. I dare say I'd prefer a good, straightforward clue. Something one can actually hold." Poirot turned from the window, his expression one of faint amusement. "Patience, my friend. Even the smallest clue must reveal itself with dignity." At that moment, Lady Imogen entered, a dark shawl drawn about her shoulders. Her eyes were heavy from sleeplessness. "Monsieur Poirot, you wish to see the grounds before breakfast. Shall I have James bring boots?" Poirot shook his head. "Non, merci. The galoshes will suffice." The garden search. The rain had softened the earth to a treacherous softness. Poirot stepped gingerly onto the terrace, Hastings close behind with an umbrella held at a careful angle so as not to disturb the detective's immaculate hat. The garden stretched out before them in ghostly silence, its statues beaded with moisture. They made their way toward the corner where the library window opened upon the path. The ground there was churned with footprints, servants, constables, and perhaps something older. Poirot crouched delicately, examining the soil. "Observe, Hastings, here, the outline of a bare foot, and here, another partially washed away. But look more closely. The depth of the impression, the narrowness of the heel. Not a man's foot. A woman's." Hastings blinked. "A woman? But why on earth would any lady go about barefoot in the rain?" "Why indeed?" murmured Poirot. "Perhaps because she wished to deceive. Or perhaps because she had no choice." He moved a few steps along the path, eyes sharp despite the drizzle. Suddenly he stooped and plucked something half buried in the mud. It was a single earring, a delicate silver drop set with a pale green stone. He turned it between his fingers thoughtfully. Voila! The partner to our mystery of the night. Miss Grey's confession is confirmed. But what, Hastings, does confirmation truly give us? Proof of innocence, or proof of opportunity? Hastings frowned. She said she fled before the murder. Poirot pocketed the earring. Yes. And she told the truth, I believe. But truth, mon ami, can sometimes serve a lie. Breakfast unease. Back inside, the household gathered for breakfast, though no one had appetite. The long dining table felt more like a tribunal than a meal. The heavy curtains muted the daylight, the air was close with tension. Colonel Waverly sat stiffly at the head, his expression hard. Miss Grey kept her gaze fixed on her plate, while Lady Imogen's trembling hands betrayed her composure. Poirot took his place calmly, surveying the company as one might study a painting, observing not merely what was there, but what was absent. Mrs. Nash did not appear. Dr. Fell explained softly that she remained in her room, sedated. Poor woman, Lady Imogen murmured. I cannot imagine her torment. The Colonel grunted. If she knew half of what her husband was about, she's lucky it's over. Miss Grey flinched. Poirot caught the movement and tucked it quietly away in his mind. Colonel, he said mildly, you speak of knowledge. What exactly did Mr. Nash do that inspired such hatred? Waverly's eyes flashed. He held debts over my family. Private matters, letters, investments, things that should have remained confidential. He made his fortune by ruining others. Poirot nodded, almost approvingly. Then we are agreed, Mr. Nash was not loved. Yet love, hatred, both, when excessive, can lead to the same place. The table fell silent. The wind rattled the windows as if echoing his words. A burnt clue. Later that morning, while the others dispersed uneasily about the house, Poirot requested that the fireplace in the library be cleared. As the butler removed the ashes, a fragment of linen caught Poirot's eye. "Wait," he said softly, holding up a gloved hand. "Do not discard that." He drew out the charred scrap. It was the corner of a handkerchief, singed but still legible enough to show the embroidered initials CN. Hastings gave a low whistle. Clara Nash. Good heavens, that seems fairly damning, doesn't it? Poirot studied it in silence for a long moment, then placed it on the desk. Too damning, perhaps. It was placed here to be found. Are you saying? I am saying, Hastings, that guilt rarely advertises itself. The truly guilty are discreet. He walked slowly about the room, hands clasped behind his back. Consider the earring of Miss Grey, the handkerchief of Mrs. Nash, the footprints of a woman. Every clue points to the feminine. It is too neat, too symmetrical. Someone arranges these things as one might arrange flowers, with care and intent. A conversation in the corridor. That afternoon, Poirot came upon Lady Imogen standing by a window overlooking the west lawn. The rain had lightened, but her face remained clouded. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "I keep thinking, if I had not invited him here, none of this would have happened." "Guilt, Lady Imogen, is an uninvited guest," he replied gently. "It arrives even when one is blameless." She gave a faint, despairing laugh. "I was engaged to him once, you know. Years ago, before he married Clara. He charmed me, and when the engagement ended, I thought I had escaped him. But he never truly left." Poirot inclined his head. "He returned to torment you?" "Yes. Letters, insinuations, demands for money. I thought if I kept the peace, he'd leave me be. But he always came back." Poirot's eyes softened. "You are not the only one he ensnared, Lady Imogen. He collected secrets as others collect art." She turned to him suddenly. "Do you think one of us, one of my guests, killed him?" Poirot's reply was calm but deliberate. "I think, madam, that whoever did so believed themselves justified." The artist's guilt. Later that day, Poirot sought out Miss Daphne Gray in the small conservatory. She sat sketching the dripping garden, though her lines trembled. "Monsieur Poirot," she said without looking up, "I suppose you think me foolish to have gone to the library last night." "Foolish? Perhaps. But not wicked," Poirot said gently. "Fear often drives us to imprudence. Tell me, mademoiselle, did you notice anything unusual as you fled?" She frowned. "A sound, footsteps on the stairs, I think. But the storm was so loud, I could not be sure." Poirot nodded. "Every detail is of value, however small." He paused, then added quietly, "You should keep to your room tonight, mademoiselle. The shadows here are growing restless." Her eyes widened. "Do you think the murderer is still among us?" Poirot smiled without mirth. "But of course. Where else should they be?" Poirot's private thoughts. That evening, the house was subdued, each inhabitant locked away with their private fears. Poirot, seated in the library once more, reviewed his notes. The clock had been replaced upon the mantel, its broken face gleaming in the lamplight. He traced the outline of the handkerchief on the desk, the earring beside it. 2 clues, both feminine, he murmured. And yet, the hand that wields such theatrics is not feminine. It is calculating, deliberate, vain. Yes, vanity is at the heart of this crime. Hastings, who had been dozing in an armchair, stirred. Vanity, Poirot? I'd have said hatred. Poirot smiled faintly. Hatred is a passion, mon ami. Vanity is an art. And our murderer, I think, fancies themselves an artist. He rose and closed the curtains. The rain had ceased entirely now, leaving only the soft drip of water from the eaves. Somewhere, deep within the house, a floorboard creaked. Poirot turned his head slightly, listening. The storm has ended, he said quietly. But the darkness, Hastings, the darkness is only beginning. Chapter 5, The Second Death. The following morning dawned with an unnatural stillness. The storm had spent itself, leaving the world washed and wan. Mist curled low across the lawns like pale smoke, and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth. Poirot rose early, his routine as precise as ever, a neat breakfast, a brief inspection of his moustaches, a polished pair of shoes. But beneath that immaculate calm, his mind was alert, restless. There was something he had missed, a thread loose in the tapestry of lies that bound Waverly Chase. By 8 o'clock, the house had begun to stir. The servants moved quietly, their usual chatter subdued. Lady Imogen had retreated to her room, while Colonel Waverly occupied himself with letters he did not read. Miss Daphne Gray was nowhere to be seen. Poirot, sensing disquiet, made his way to the conservatory, the place where the young artist had sought refuge the previous day. The door was ajar. He stepped inside. The discovery. A gasp escaped him, sharp, involuntary. Miss Daphne Gray lay sprawled upon the marble tiles, her head turned to one side, her eyes wide open in a glassy stare. The water from a shattered vase pooled around her, mingling with a dark stain that needed no explanation. Hastings, summoned moments later, stood frozen in the doorway. Good Lord, Poirot, another one. The poor girl, is she dead? Poirot said softly, kneeling beside her. Quite dead. The wound is to the temple, blunt force. The same as Nash. He examined the scene with minute care, the broken vase, the displaced easel, a smear of mud leading from the open terrace door. Then his eyes caught upon something small and gleaming near her hand, a gold cufflink, oval, engraved with the initials R.W. Poirot lifted it delicately. Reginald Waverly, he murmured. Mon Dieu. The pattern continues. Hastings stared. But the Colonel? He couldn't possibly. Ah, but you see, Hastings, possibility and proof are not the same. Someone wishes us to believe that the Colonel killed her, just as they wished us to believe that Mrs. Nash killed her husband. The panic spreads. The household assembled in the drawing-room, white-faced and trembling. Lady Imogen clutched a handkerchief to her lips, the Colonel's jaw was tight with anger. This is intolerable, he thundered. I demand that the police be called at once. Poirot inclined his head. They have already been sent for, Colonel. But before they arrive, we must speak frankly. Mademoiselle Gray's death cannot be dismissed as accident. It is murder. Lady Imogen's voice shook. But who could do such a thing? Why would anyone want to harm Daphne? Poirot's gaze swept over them, calm, penetrating. Because, madam, she knew something. Something that threatened the murderer. The Colonel turned sharply. If you're implying... Poirot raised a hand. I imply nothing, monsieur. I merely observe. He moved closer to the fireplace, where the charred handkerchief still lay. First, a man is murdered. Then, a woman who might have seen or heard something. The connection is clear. But the motive, that is what remains veiled. Mrs. Nash entered at that moment, pale and unsteady, her nurse hovering behind her. Her eyes darted about the room. Another death? Oh God, no, not again. Poirot approached gently. Madam, I must ask, did you ever see Mr. Nash wear cufflinks such as these? He held out the gold oval piece. She shook her head. No. Those belong to Colonel Waverly. I've seen them often, at dinner. The Colonel's fists clenched. I tell you, Poirot, someone is planting these things to trap me. Poirot's eyes glinted. Oh, mon Colonel. And that someone is clever, very clever. The inspector arrives. By mid-morning, Inspector Dale from the local constabulary arrived, a brisk man with a practical air and a distrust of foreigners that he tried, unsuccessfully, to conceal. 2 deaths in 2 nights, he muttered, surveying the scene in the conservatory. Nasty business. Any theories, Mr. Poirot? Poirot gave a small smile. Many, Inspector. But as yet, no proof. Only patterns. Patterns, eh? Dale snorted. Well, we'll find something solid soon enough. I'll need statements from everyone. Poirot inclined his head. Of course. But permit me one small liberty before your men trample the flower beds. He crouched near the open terrace door. Note the mud, Inspector. It is thick, clinging. Yet the footprints are light, as though the person walked carefully, even gracefully. Not a heavy man like the Colonel. Meaning that whoever killed Miss Grey wished to make it appear otherwise. Poirot's deduction begins. That afternoon, Poirot withdrew to the library, deep in thought. Hastings paced restlessly. This is getting impossible, Poirot. First Nash, now Miss Grey. If someone's trying to frame the Colonel, who's next? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Who indeed? Let us list what we know. He began to tick off points on his fingers. A man despised by all, found dead in his host's library. A woman, frightened, claiming innocence yet admitting presence. A second victim, struck in the same manner, after confiding she had heard footsteps. Clues that appear too convenient, an earring, a handkerchief, a cufflink. He paused. And lastly, a pattern, a deliberate alternation of guilt, woman, man, woman. You see? The murderer plays a little game, to keep suspicion dancing like a pendulum. Hastings frowned. Then you believe both murders are the work of the same hand? Absolutely. The mind is the same, precise, theatrical, fond of misdirection. The killer wishes to stage a drama, not merely commit a crime. Poirot's gaze lifted toward the window, where rain still clung to the glass in silver beads. But soon, mon ami, the curtain must rise on the final act. An unexpected visitor. Evening descended with unnerving quiet. Poirot sat alone, writing notes, when a soft knock came at the door. Lady Imogen entered. She looked drawn but determined. Monsieur Poirot, I must tell you something. He gestured for her to sit. Please, madam. She hesitated, then spoke in a low, trembling voice. Last night, before Daphne died, I saw someone in the corridor outside her room. A shadow, slipping toward the conservatory. Who? She shook her head. I thought it was the Colonel at first, the height, the build, but now. I'm not sure. The face was turned away. Poirot leaned forward. Did the person carry anything? A small parcel, I think. Wrapped in cloth. Merci, Lady Imogen. You have been most helpful. When she had gone, Hastings exclaimed. "Well, that points to the Colonel again." Poirot's expression was unreadable. "Or to someone who wishes us to think so." Hastings, the Colonel is many things, but not subtle. The hand behind these crimes, it is subtle indeed. The revelation in the ashes. Late that night, when the house had settled into uneasy slumber, Poirot returned to the library once more. The fire had burned low. He stirred the ashes gently, and something metallic clinked. He reached in with tongs and drew out a small, scorched object, the remains of a key. Stamped faintly upon it were the letters S.C. Poirot's eyes gleamed. S.C. Samuel Collier, the valet. Hastings, who had followed him in, gasped. "Good heavens, Poirot, the valet?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the valet's possessions have been used, just as others. The key, my dear Hastings, may open not a door, but a mind." He placed the fragment beside the other clues, the earring, the handkerchief, the cuff link, and regarded them thoughtfully. "One clue for each death," he murmured. "But the pattern, it requires symmetry. Therefore, there will be a third." Hastings paled. "You mean?" "Yes, mon ami. The murderer has not yet finished. The play is incomplete." He closed his notebook with a soft snap. "But this time, we shall be ready." Hercule Poirot does not wait to be surprised. Chapter 6, The Gathering Storm Within. The following day broke bright and cold. The sky, scoured clean by the rain, stretched pale and hard as glass above the sodden gardens. The calm after the storm was deceptive. Waverly Chase was no longer a house but a crucible, each of its inhabitants simmering with fear and suspicion. Poirot breakfasted alone in the morning room, taking careful note of the footfalls in the corridor. His grey eyes glittered with contained energy. A pattern was forming, not yet complete, but close enough for him to glimpse the design beneath the chaos. When Hastings entered, brisk and anxious, Poirot merely looked up from his coffee. "Bon matin, mon ami," he said lightly. "You slept poorly, I see." Hastings sighed. "How could I not? The house feels cursed. Lady Imogen won't leave her room, the Colonel's in a fury, and Mrs. Nash keeps asking if she's next." Poirot stirred his coffee delicately. "And what of the servants?" "Frightened, of course. Collier, the valet, says he saw a light in the library around 2 this morning. No one admits to being there." "Ah," said Poirot softly. "A light at 2. How very interesting." He set down his cup with precision. "Come, Hastings. Let us observe the living before the dead speak again." The Colonel's fury. They found Colonel Waverly in the gunroom, polishing a revolver with unnecessary vigor. His jaw was set, his movements sharp. "Morning, Poirot. I suppose you've come to ask more damned questions." Poirot bowed slightly. "Indeed, Colonel. I must trouble you a little longer. It is a matter of symmetry." The Colonel looked up sharply. "Symmetry?" "Yes. The killer leaves behind tokens, small things belonging to others. One might even call them souvenirs." Poirot's gaze drifted toward the Colonel's sleeve, where a faint smudge of earth clung. "You accuse me again, I suppose," the Colonel snapped. "Because of that cuff-link nonsense." Poirot smiled faintly. "I accuse no one. But I notice everything. That, I fear, is my curse." He stepped closer. "Tell me, Colonel, where were you last night at 2 o'clock? The older man hesitated. "In my room." "Asleep? Did anyone see you?" "No." Poirot inclined his head. "Very well. You may put away your revolver, Colonel." I doubt you will need it, though I advise against loading it. The temptation, you understand, might become inconvenient. Waverly's eyes narrowed. You think I'll shoot someone? Poirot's expression softened. I think, perhaps, you are already at war with yourself. A lady's confession. From there, Poirot went to Lady Imogen's room. She sat near the window, her profile outlined against the winter light. On the table beside her lay a sealed letter. Ah, monsieur, she said wearily. You must think us all monsters. None, madam, Poirot replied. Only frightened children, playing games they do not understand. Her lips trembled. I have written to the police. To confess. Confess. Poirot raised an eyebrow. To what, madam? To nothing, perhaps. But it feels as though his death belongs to me. If I had refused Nash's invitation, if I had sent him away, he would still live. Poirot shook his head gently. You are mistaken. His death was decided long before you invited him. The murderer merely waited for a convenient stage. He took up the letter and placed it back upon the table. Keep this, Lady Imogen. For now, guilt is a distraction, and distractions serve only the murderer. Her eyes filled with tears. Do you really think you can find them? Poirot smiled slightly. I have already found them, madam. I merely wait for them to reveal themselves. The valet's lie. Later that morning, Poirot summoned Samuel Collier, the valet. The man was tall, thin, and nervous, with eyes that darted like trapped birds. Mr. Collier, Poirot began, you were in the corridor at 2 o'clock this morning. The valet swallowed. Yes, sir. I couldn't sleep. I thought I saw a light in the library. Did you enter? No, sir. I was afraid. Poirot regarded him steadily. Afraid of what? Of seeing something, sir. After what's happened? Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone remained sharp. And yet, you did not mention it until this morning. I didn't want to cause trouble, sir. Trouble, said Poirot softly, has already found us. He placed the burnt key on the desk between them. You recognize this? Collier's face blanched. That's from my cabinet. Where did you? Poirot raised a hand. You confirm, then, that it is yours? Yes, sir, but I swear I didn't put it in the fire. Poirot leaned back. Then perhaps someone wished to destroy something belonging to you. Tell me, Mr. Collier, where were you when Miss Grey was killed? In the servants' hall, sir. Ask cook, she'll tell you. Poirot nodded. I shall. You may go. When the valet had gone, Hastings exclaimed, well, that settles that. Someone's framing him too. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, but now you begin to see the pattern, mon ami. The killer leaves us a trail of borrowed guilt, like breadcrumbs leading not home, but astray. Tea and theories. That afternoon, Poirot requested all the household to take tea together in the drawing room. The atmosphere was brittle. Even the clink of china seemed too loud. Mrs. Nash trembled as she poured. Monsieur Poirot, must we all sit together? It feels ghastly. Poirot's tone was calm. Unity, madam, is our protection. The murderer thrives in secrecy. Lady Imogen stared into her cup. And if they sit among us now? Then, said Poirot gently, they are most uncomfortable. He moved to the fireplace, hands clasped neatly behind him. Consider, Miss Amos, 2 deaths, each pointing to an innocent. A handkerchief, a cufflink, a key. 3 clues, each stolen, each placed. Tell me, who among you had access to all these things? The silence was complete. Poirot's gaze swept over them, Mrs. Nash, trembling, the Colonel, defiant, Lady Imogen, pale, the valet, motionless by the door. Then, quietly, Poirot said, "Only one person serves every room, knows every drawer, and hears every conversation, the servant." Collier stiffened. "That's a lie." "You're twisting things." Poirot inclined his head. "Perhaps. But you see, I do not yet say you are guilty. I only say you are useful, to the one who is." A seed of fear. After tea, Poirot asked Hastings to ensure no one left the house that night. "You believe the murderer will strike again?" Hastings asked. Poirot's voice was grave. "Oh, fear is like hunger, it grows. The killer will soon act not from necessity, but from compulsion." He moved to the window, gazing out into the fading light. "This house, it is a theatre of guilt. Each soul hides something. But only one hides murder. Then you think you can trap them tonight?" Poirot smiled slightly. "I think, Hastings, that I shall invite them to trap themselves." The letter in the drawer. Late that night, Poirot revisited the library. The air was still, the clock ticking softly once more. He opened the desk drawer where Nash had kept his papers, and there, beneath the false bottom, he found a folded note. He read it slowly, his lips tightening as he reached the end. "You think you can play with people's lives and suffer no consequence. But I have found the courage you never believed I possessed." The note was unsigned. Poirot replaced it carefully, his mind alight with certainty. "The handwriting," he murmured, "it is careful, but the emotion beneath it, volcanic. This is the hand of one long humiliated, long silent. And now, reborn as avenger." He turned off the lamp and whispered to the empty room. "Tomorrow, mon ami le meurtrier, your mask will fall." Chapter 7. The trap is set. A cold wind moved across the grounds of Waverly Chase that evening, stirring the bare branches like the fingers of restless ghosts. The house seemed to shrink in upon itself, the windows gleaming faintly against the gathering dark. Within, every corridor echoed with whispered fears and quiet steps. Hercule Poirot, however, was untroubled. He sat in the drawing-room, immaculate as ever, a small notebook open before him, his pencil tapping a precise rhythm against the page. Hastings, who had been pacing for nearly an hour, finally blurted, "Poirot, this silence is driving me mad. You've done nothing all day but sit there, tapping away like a metronome. What are you waiting for?" Poirot looked up with a faint smile. "For the moment when every mask must slip, mon ami. The murderer grows impatient, they must act soon. The fear that once served as their shield now presses upon them like a weight. They will make their move tonight." Hastings frowned. "And what do you intend to do about it? Surely you can't just wait for someone else to die." "Ah, but we shall not wait idly," Poirot said smoothly. "We shall prepare a little stage, a performance in which the actors may reveal themselves." The plan. After dinner, Poirot summoned the entire household to the library. The group gathered uneasily, Lady Imogen pale but composed, Colonel Waverly stiff with anger, Mrs. Nash trembling beneath her shawl, and Samuel Collier, the valet, watchful and wary. Poirot stood before the hearth, his small frame commanding in the flickering firelight. "My friends," he began, "the police will return in the morning. They expect answers. So do I tonight. I propose we end this." The Colonel barked a laugh. "And how, pray, do you intend to manage that?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "By the simple device of truth, mon Colonel. But truth must be coaxed, it does not shout, it whispers." He gestured toward the great clock on the mantel. Its repaired face gleamed, its pendulum swinging with hypnotic grace. "We shall gather here at 10 o'clock. The murderer, I think, will not resist the temptation to attend." Lady Imogen drew a sharp breath. "You mean to confront them?" Poirot inclined his head. "Not quite. I mean to invite them to betray themselves." Mrs. Nash let out a weak sob. "I cannot bear this any longer, Monsieur Poirot. I'm afraid." Poirot moved to her side and took her hand gently. "Courage, madam. The end approaches. And I promise you, justice will come softly, like dawn after a long night." The gathering storm. At precisely 10, the library was prepared. Poirot had insisted that every lamp be lit, the curtains drawn tight, and the clock wound so that its chime would mark the hour clearly. The fire crackled low, throwing shifting patterns of gold upon the faces of those assembled. Each guest took their seat in silence. Poirot stood near the desk, his hands folded neatly. Hastings lingered near the door, ready for anything. Poirot spoke quietly. "We are here to speak of truth, and of courage. 2 nights ago, Mr. Nash was struck down. Last night, Miss Grey followed him. The murderer believed they had silenced the only one who knew. But alas, they are mistaken." A collective shudder rippled through the room. The Colonel leaned forward. "If you know who did it, Poirot, stop playing games and name them." Poirot's voice was calm. "All in good time, mon Colonel. For now, we observe." His gaze travelled from face to face, Lady Imogen's trembling hands, Mrs. Nash's downcast eyes, the valet's rigid stance. "Guilt," he said softly, "is not easily hidden. It leaks into the eyes, the voice, the posture. Tonight, I wish to see how it behaves under the light." He crossed to the desk and drew out the 3 objects, the handkerchief, the cufflink, the burnt key. He laid them side by side. 3 deaths, 3 symbols. 1 woman's handkerchief, 1 man's cufflink, 1 servant's key. The murderer hides behind these tokens, pointing suspicion from one to another like a magician's trick. He turned suddenly. "But the trick, Miss Amos, is not perfect." The moment before. A sound interrupted him, the faint creak of a floorboard beyond the door. Hastings turned sharply, but Poirot raised a hand. "Let them listen," he murmured. "Perhaps they are curious how the tale will end." He resumed, his tone lower now. Each clue was chosen with precision, placed with care. But only one person in this house had access to all of them, and to the knowledge of when the others slept. One person who could move freely, unseen. Collier swallowed hard. "You mean me, I suppose." Poirot gave a small shrug. "You, or someone who used you. You were the perfect scapegoat." Mrs. Nash made a sudden sound, half sob, half gasp, and rose unsteadily to her feet. "Please, no more. I can't endure it." Poirot turned to her gently. "Sit, madam. You have borne much. But this is nearly finished." Then, his eyes narrowing slightly, he added, "Unless, of course, you prefer to confess now." She froze, staring at him with stricken eyes. "Confess? To what?" "To knowledge, madam. You know something you have not told." I can't." "Ah, but you can. And you will." The air in the room grew thick with tension. The ticking of the clock sounded unnaturally loud, like a beating heart. The sudden cry. And then it came, a sharp cry from the doorway. Hastings spun round, just in time to see a shadow vanish down the corridor. After them, he shouted. But Poirot did not move. He stood perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the fireplace. "No, Hastings. Let them run." The rat flees when the trap closes. A moment later, there came the sound of a door slamming somewhere above, followed by the heavy thud of hurried footsteps on the landing. Poirot turned to the others. "Stay here. Do not move." He climbed the staircase with unhurried precision, his small feet making scarcely a sound. Hastings followed, breathless, heart-pounding. They reached the corridor leading to the servants' quarters, and there, in the half-light, stood Samuel Collier, trembling, his back against the wall. In his hand gleamed a small pistol. "Don't come any closer," he cried. "You'll never prove it." Poirot stopped several paces away. "Mon pauvre garçon," he said softly, "you misunderstand. It is already proved. The trap springs." Collier's hand shook violently. "He ruined her. Nash, he destroyed her life, and then laughed about it. She trusted him, and he—" Poirot's voice remained calm. "You speak of Mrs. Nash." The valet's eyes flickered. "She loved him once. Before he married her. He promised her everything. And when she came to him for help, he mocked her. I couldn't stand it. I thought if he were gone, she'd be free." Poirot nodded slowly. "And Miss Grey?" "I never meant. She saw me leave the library that night. I had to stop her telling anyone. I only wanted to frighten her, but," he broke off, face contorted. "She screamed." Poirot's voice was grave. "And so, in saving one woman, you destroyed 2 lives, and your own." Collier sagged, the gun lowering. "I didn't mean for it to go so far." Poirot stepped forward, very gently, and took the weapon from his hand. "No, mon ami. Murder always goes farther than we mean." From below came the sound of running feet and the inspector's voice shouting orders. Poirot turned to Hastings. "It is finished." The aftermath. Half an hour later, Collier sat quietly in the study, guarded but calm. Mrs. Nash wept silently in Lady Imogen's arms. The Colonel stood by the hearth, grim-faced. Poirot, as always, was serene. "He killed for love," he said softly. "A dangerous motive, it excuses nothing, yet explains much." Hastings sighed. "You knew it was him all along, didn't you?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Not from the beginning. But from the moment I saw the ashes of the burnt key. You see, Hastings, the murderer always leaves behind a little of themselves, a fragment of pride, a trace of vanity. He could not destroy all evidence of his presence." He closed his notebook and looked toward the window, where dawn was beginning to color the sky. "And thus, we arrive at the truth, one born not of malice, but of wounded devotion." Hastings shook his head. "You make it sound almost tragic." Poirot's eyes softened. "It is tragic, mon ami. Every murder is, not only for the dead, but for those who love too much, too blindly." He turned to the room, where the first light of morning spilled across the floor. "Tonight, the house of Waverly Chase may sleep again." Chapter 8, The Final Curtain. Morning light streamed through the tall windows of Waverly Chase, pale and cold after the long night of confession. A hush had fallen over the great house, a silence not of fear now, but of shock, exhaustion, and fragile relief. The storm that had battered its walls had passed, leaving behind stillness. Poirot sat at the head of the long dining table, his little grey cells at rest at last. Before him was a delicate cup of chocolate, steaming faintly. Hastings, beside him, looked worn but alert, his eyes still haunted by the memory of Samuel Collier's trembling confession. "Do you ever grow used to it, Poirot?" Hastings asked quietly. "The end, I mean. When the murderer's unmasked and everything falls to pieces." Poirot stirred his chocolate delicately. "One never grows used to tragedy, mon ami. One only learns to understand it." And to pity it. He glanced around the room. Lady Imogen sat stiffly at the far end, her face pale but her posture composed. Mrs. Nash, her eyes red from tears, had been persuaded to join them by Lady Imogen's insistence. Colonel Waverly stood near the hearth, a cigar in one hand, though he had not lit it. His jaw was tight, his gaze fixed on the window where the pale sky reflected against the glass. At length, Poirot rose and cleared his throat. The sound, though soft, commanded instant attention. The final gathering. "My friends," he began, "we have come to the end of this sad affair. 2 lives have been lost, a 3rd ruined, and a household shattered. Yet even in such darkness, there must be clarity, for without understanding, there can be no peace." He paced slowly, his polished shoes glinting as he moved. "Let us, then, examine the crime as I see it, not with passion, but with precision." He looked to Mrs. Nash. "It began many years ago, did it not, madam? When Mr. Nash, then a man of charm and ambition, promised you a future he never intended to keep." Her eyes filled again with tears, but she nodded faintly. "I was young, foolish. I believed him." Poirot inclined his head. "He married another for wealth and standing, yet continued to keep you close, a cruel kindness, perhaps the worst kind. When he brought you here as housekeeper, you believed it a reconciliation. But he mocked you still, and worse, he threatened to dismiss you when you begged for help for your nephew." A murmur ran around the table. "Yes, the nephew," Poirot continued. "Samuel Collier. A boy without prospects, grateful for your affection. You found him a place here, as valet. He was loyal to you, protective, proud. And when he overheard the words between you and Mr. Nash that night, when he heard Mr. Nash's laughter, he lost control. He struck him." Mrs. Nash let out a small cry. Poirot's voice, however, remained gentle. "It was not planned. The blow was instinctive, but fatal. And when he realized what he had done, panic took him. He sought to disguise his crime. He left clues to point suspicion elsewhere, a lady's handkerchief, a cufflink stolen from the colonel's drawer, and later, the burnt key from his own room, to confuse the pattern further." Colonel Waverly's brow darkened. "And the girl?" "Miss Grey." Poirot sighed. "She was the innocent who saw too much. She had gone downstairs to fetch a letter she'd dropped earlier in the evening. She saw Collier leaving the library, and though she was uncertain what it meant, he could not take the chance. When she confronted him the next night, he tried only to frighten her into silence. But fear makes the hand unsteady. In the struggle, she fell, and struck her head upon the marble hearth." There was a collective intake of breath. Poirot paused to let the gravity of it settle over them all. He had killed again, though not by design. After that, he burned the key and left the ashes in the hearth, hoping to create confusion. He believed he had hidden his tracks, but as always, the smallest details betray the largest truths. The details that spoke. Hastings leaned forward. "You mean the burnt key was the clue?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Oui, mon ami. The ashes told me much. You see, the key was burnt after the body was discovered, not before. Only one man had reason to burn it then, the one who feared his connection to the servants' quarters might be traced. Monsieur Collier." He gestured to the others. "Then, there was the handkerchief, a woman's monogram. Too obvious, too convenient. And the cufflink, found near the body, though no trace of mud or dust clung to it, as it would have if it had fallen naturally. Each was a piece of theatre, not reality. And who in this house loved to listen from the shadows, to arrange things in their proper place? The valet. The servant who sees everything but is seen by none." Poirot folded his hands. He underestimated, however, Two things, the observation of Hercule Poirot, and the quiet endurance of guilt. When I looked into his eyes last night, I saw it. He had not slept in days. He was waiting to be found. Lady Imogen shivered. So all along, we were living under the same roof as a murderer, and we never knew. Poirot gave a small, sad smile. One rarely does, mademoiselle. The murderer is not always the stranger at the gate. Sometimes, he is the loyal servant who fetches your tea. The weight of justice. Colonel Waverly cleared his throat gruffly. He'll hang for it, of course. Poirot's gaze was distant. Perhaps. Though I think the law will show some mercy. His confession was full, his motive, misguided love, clear. He did not kill from greed or malice, but from the desperate desire to protect one who had already suffered enough. He turned to Mrs. Nash, whose face was buried in her hands. You must not blame yourself, madam. You did not strike the blow, but your silence afterwards, that was its own kind of wound. You feared the truth, and in doing so, chained him to his guilt. She whispered, I didn't know what to do. I thought if I said nothing, it might somehow go away. Poirot nodded slowly. The truth never goes away, madam. It waits, quietly, patiently, until the moment comes when it must be spoken. The little grey cells rest. When the inspector arrived to escort Collier away, the house seemed to exhale. Poirot stood at the window, watching the figure disappear through the mist. He sighed, then reached for his hat and cane. Hastings, beside him, murmured, I don't know how you bear it, Poirot. I'd feel nothing but sorrow. Poirot turned, his expression solemn. I do feel sorrow, mon ami. But also peace. For every mystery solved, every crime understood, brings a little more order to the chaos of the world. That, you see, is my duty, to bring order, where once there was only confusion. He smiled faintly. The world, Hastings, is like this house, full of locked doors, secrets, and dust. One must simply find the right key, and be brave enough to turn it. Hastings chuckled weakly. And you, I suppose, have never been afraid? Poirot lifted a brow. Mais non. Of course I have been afraid. But I have also been tidy. And that, my friend, is sometimes the same thing. The curtain falls. By midday, the guests began to leave. Lady Imogen pressed Poirot's hand with quiet gratitude. You've given this house peace again, Monsieur Poirot. I shall never forget it. He bowed slightly. It is not I who give peace, mademoiselle, only the truth. Outside, the grounds of Waverly Chase stretched beneath a pale October sky. The wind moved gently through the trees, and the birds, silent for so long, began to sing again. Poirot and Hastings walked down the drive, their figures small against the vast grey landscape. The detective's hat sat perfectly straight upon his immaculate head, not a hair was out of place. Another case closed, Poirot, Hastings said, half to himself. Poirot nodded. Yes, mon ami. But remember, the heart of man remains the greatest mystery of all. He paused, looking back once more at the house silhouetted against the sky. The murder at Waverly Chase, he said softly, was born not from hatred, but from love. And love, Hastings, that is the most dangerous motive of all. And with that, he turned away, his small, dignified figure moving steadily into the morning light.